Democratic Party leadership really did not learn the lessons that I think we all should have learned from the 2016 presidential election, meaning that, you had this inspiring grassroots candidate in Bernie Sanders, and in 2016, he was really facing much more opposition from within the Democratic Party than from the right or from, Trump or from the other Republican candidates. That I think that the leaders of the Democratic Party would never say this, but their class interests are actually aligned with President Trump more than they are with Senator Bernie Sanders, as somebody whose entire platform and his entire political career has been dedicated to empowering working people and seeking to make our political system more accessible and accountable and transparent. That is completely against the interests of the people and the leadership of the Democratic Party. It's like insanity. They continue to do the same thing, expecting a different result. They did the same thing this time around that they did in 2016. They ran this, Joe Biden, who is a candidate that, if he's the Democratic nominee, I'm going to vote for him in November because I feel an obligation to vote for the Democratic nominee if that's the only viable option against President Trump. But I fear that a lot of voters, just like in 2016, will feel very disillusioned and even sort of disenfranchised by the Democratic Party's decisions, and that they're probably, they might not show up in November. At least 3,000 people in just a couple days, maybe even just the first day, joined the DSA. Again, it's this dissatisfied base that is going to either be democratically enabled to change the Democratic Party, or this base is going to start a party of their own. Donald Trump was probably delighted to see the party doing what they did in 2016 because it worked out for President Trump in 2016. Unfortunately, Trump and the people around him probably have a realistic assessment, and I'm sure, they just want to win. They just want to maintain power. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party, I think, is nominating the person who is more likely to allow that to happen. We've lost, I think, over 10,000 New Yorkers now across the state, but mostly in New York City, primarily in Brooklyn and Queens, and I'm in Brooklyn, to the virus. Many people have lost their jobs. The unemployment rate is really high now. The agencies, the systems, and programs that existed up until now to try to address unemployment and social benefits are really woefully inadequate, because we were operating, at least in New York State, on an austerity budget. These federal stimulus checks, right? Essentially, sort of like a universal basic income, except it is means tested. So it's based on your previous year's taxes, or your income reported on your previous year's taxes in the year before that. So some people are receiving that cash assistance, but it's in New York, especially because it's like the same amount across the United States. New York is a very expensive place to live in relation to the rest of the country. So it's totally inadequate for a lot of even working class or low income families. That $1,200 check is not going to cover rent alone for a month. We have a very inequitable tax system in New York. There are multimillionaires and billionaires in our state who, because they maintain a primary residence elsewhere, but they own a mansion in New York City, they don't pay income taxes here. There are numerous tax loopholes that allow the very wealthy and also corporations who are based in New York to not have to pay their fair share of taxes. And this is, I think, the largest contributing factor to why we have this enormous deficit in New York State that provoked the governor to even try to cut Medicaid, the essential, the closest thing that we have to Medicare for all, the healthcare social safety net for Americans who are low income. So to do that, to be willing to do that during a public health crisis and be unwilling to raise taxes is just absolutely unconscionable. But that's the leadership that we have in the executive at the state level. The district that I live in and represent is overwhelmingly working class. It is mostly people of color, mostly Black and Latino. Those tenants, some of them are without cooking gas, dealing with some of the same issues that they dealt with before this crisis, but now they're exacerbated, they're even worse during the public health crisis. And so delivering meals to them. This week I went to Woodhull Hospital, our local public safety net hospital that is really on the front lines of the crisis. They're getting an enormous number of cases. We have this for-profit healthcare system in New York, in the United States, that is totally inadequate. It means that people who are more vulnerable during a pandemic because of their socioeconomic status, those people already went into this without adequate health care. So they have all of these preventable medical conditions, basically, our neighbors and our people here in Brooklyn. There's a really high asthma rate, which is very serious, given the symptoms of COVID-19 and the way that it impacts the respiratory system. There's like a higher rate of hypertension, and it's not because genetically we're predisposed to it. It's actually because we live in, we meaning Black and brown people in New York live in food deserts, live without, chronically without adequate access to nutritious food like produce. And many people are living on food stamps or just like destitute. So of course, our people are going to be more vulnerable to catching coronavirus. And sure enough, now we finally have this data that tells us sort of what we already know, which is that the Black and Hispanic population in New York are contracting coronavirus at double the rate of the white population in New York. Given that we're technically a minority citywide, it's an absolutely alarming number of cases. And as a result, it's burdening hospitals. If our governor had not been so committed to starving our communities of resources for years, then we would be in a better situation right now. As upset as I am, disappointed as I am with the government's response, I've been really encouraged to see the response of people in our communities, that people are demonstrating solidarity with each other. They're, from day one, were rapidly assembling, thinking about our elders and our neighbors who would need meals delivered to them and need services, and stepping up to do it, seeing that our political leadership wasn't doing what it takes. I know it's sort of cliche to say like it's socialism or barbarism, but I think that idea is on full display right now. Because we don't have socialist or social democratic programs to provide health care for people, to provide unemployment. Right now, thankfully, there's a moratorium on evictions. So at least even if people can't afford to pay their rent, they can't be thrown out on the street. But that moratorium is temporary. And I'm really concerned about the impact that we're going to see after the state of emergency ends. And people are, businesses reopen, and like the stock market reopens, and the working class and the middle class are going to be devastated by this crisis if we don't do the right thing and finally change course. It's agitating people. And I think that's a positive outcome of this. I want people to develop class consciousness. I don't want them to suffer in order for that to happen at all. But I do think that one positive outcome of this is that people are like waking up, and people who previously were dismissive of things like a rent suspension or more the government stepping in and regulating things more and helping people, those people are all supporting these policies now. And I just think it's a shame that it's taken something as devastating as this pandemic to do that. And I also think it would be a great shame if after all of this, people have short memories and they just are determined to try to go back to normal. Life before this was so miserable already for so many people, and it's like my hope, and I'm determined to make sure that we're, when we get out of quarantine, that people don't have a short memory and they don't just try to go back to business as usual, because business as usual is what got us into this mess, and it's deadly.